Checkr has taken the 1% pledge to pledge 1% of our profits, our equity, and our product to social impact. And we are investing tremendously in fair chance advocacy and awareness. I can't tell you how life-changing it is for people. And then also businesses win. Our like society wins when people are earning a living wage. They're not going back into the system, and we're kind of helping end the cycle for many.
Our guest today is Lindsay Grace, who's the COO at an incredible company called Checkr. She's going to talk a lot towards the end of the interview around investing in fair chance hiring. Amazing data point. 1 out of 3 adults in the United States has some kind of a criminal charge against them, which is incredible to me. How they also dedicate 1%. They're part of the 1% pledge. She's going to talk about AI changes inside of the organization, what to focus on as a COO of kind of an 800-person company. She talks about the rule of 40, which is an interesting ratio or number that combines EBIT margin and growth rate of an organization, how to actually scale and run a company with 100,000 customers that are currently mostly in the USA because of the actual product they've got. DoorDash was also their first customer. You're going to love this episode. We'll see you on the inside. You can also watch it on our Second in Command podcast YouTube channel. So, Lindsay, welcome to the Second in Command podcast.
Thank you, Cameron. So good to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to this, actually. My wife and I were chatting about Checkr the other day, and she was mentioning that she's known the company for probably 8 or 9 years since she was back in the tech sector and had pretty
Fantastic.
rave reviews of the business from even back then. So I wanted to get some color as to kind of where the organization has gotten to now, and really kind of how you've helped kind of steer that organization through the growth. So maybe just tell us a little bit about what Checkr does, where you are as an organization now, and then I'll kind of replay.
Yeah, so Checkr, we are a Series E tech company, been around 10 years. And the kind of high level of what we do is we've brought tech to background checks and employment screens. And the way Checkr started, our co-founders, Jonathan and Daniel, like 12 years ago, 11 years ago or so, were working at a delivery startup called Deliveroo, a gig startup where they're needed to hire people quickly to be able to deliver things. And that was like the name of the game back then, is get supply as quickly as possible for these gig companies. And they noticed a few things in this process. They were engineers coding, trying to make it go quickly. First of all, it was incredibly slow. Getting someone hired onto the platform could take weeks or months, and there were no APIs or technology to do this. The second was it was very manual. There were people like going to courthouses, manually processing paper and back offices to get this done. And the third piece was that it was used as a tool, background checks as a tool really to screen people out of the workforce, and there was no real nuance. And so they started Checkr and have completely brought technology to this process. The 90% of background checks through Checkr are completed within minutes. There's AI and machine learning to help categorize and classify all the data, not to make decisions, but to make it in an automated way, reduce error, make it more compliant. And then from a mission perspective, we've invested a lot in second chance advocacy and awareness, and allowing our customers to be more nuanced in their approach to using background checks should they choose. So that was the company, and we've scaled since then. You have over 100,000 customers, processing more background checks than any company in the United States, and really are making an impact on the world through our mission as well.
I love that. I want to talk about the mission. I also want to talk some more about the growth and kind of the stage of the organization you're at now. But I'm curious just on the kind of core product itself. Are background checks pretty standard globally in most of the first world, emerging market countries, or are they pretty kind of focused on just the US market? Or can you speak to that?
The US is absolutely the most litigious society, and one that uses background checks the most. And but there's checks of sorts across every country, especially if you're thinking about things like driving people around. You want to make sure that there's a safe driving record. But it differs based on industry and country. The United States is the biggest consumer of them.
So do you operate just in the United States then, I guess, with customers, or are you more global?
Right now, all of our growth has been primarily focused in the United States. If you're a US company hiring people overseas, we'll do those checks as well, but we're not right now yet focused on companies overseas.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was curious about that. I mean, I've worked with CEOs now in 29 countries. I've been a global nomad for the last 3 years, been in 54 countries, and you don't hear about the background checks as much as you do in the US. So I was curious whether you were one of those large tech companies that are able to be global, or whether you're kind of market restrained a little bit more in the US, but it sounds like you are. Is that a hindrance, or is it an opportunity when you're more market restrained just into the US?
Oh, I would say we're not market restrained from a TAM perspective. There's absolutely the TAM and the opportunity there. It's really a sequencing. It's a when, not if. And we're actively, we have business in Canada, we have checks in the UK, and we're expanding to across country. So it's more of a product roadmap. The
Okay.
concentration of the TAM is in the US, but there is absolutely opportunity outside of the US.
So Jim Collins talked about that and saying, one of the leaders' core jobs is to say no more often than we say yes. I remember back when we were scaling 1-800-GOT-JUNK, we had a woman call in to haul junk, and she gave us the street address, and I said, no, we don't service that zip code. She said, well, you're across the street. And we looked it up and we said, yeah, that's a different zip code. She goes, you're crazy. Like, it's literally across the street. And so is that kind
Yeah,
of part of what you're doing, is just staying hyper focused, and you're avoiding
exactly.
the distraction? How do you stay that course and tell the team that when you're an organization that's as large as you are?
Believe me, it is hard. Especially we have customers begging us to do things for them in other countries. I think we go through this pretty rigorous process every year. We're just going through it right now. Actually, it's a 3-year planning process where we looked at an unconstrained view of our product roadmap, where we want to innovate, where we want to grow within our core ICP, beyond geographically expansive, and really create this opportunity to think really, really big. So we go through that, and we can do a lot of iterations, and then we meet as a leadership team and we review all of the plans. And always our Daniel, our CEO, he's said we can't do it all. And how are we going to focus? And then we go through and say, what are our core priorities as a business? And so right now, one of our big focus areas is serving enterprises incredibly well in the United States and making sure that we're unconstrained in doing that. And then what's beyond that? And so we have the conversation. We're meeting actually later this week to finalize that for the kind of our next derivation of that. But it is hard, and I think that I have a tremendous amount of respect for our CEO and our Chief Product Officer,
Totally.
who kind of saying, like, we can't do everything. We can do a lot of things not very well, or we can do fewer things well. What are we going to do?
So I'm also curious on with 100,000 customers. I mean, you've got to be getting a ton of, every tech company does, a ton of feature requests from the clients.
Mhm.
If the product only do this, we could use it more. If the product only did that, we could sell it to more clients. How do you decide? How does the organization decide what to say yes to and what to say no to
Mhm.
keep the
Mhm.
product,
Yeah.
streamlined and lean, or are you just constantly adding to it?
I think that when we think about SMBs and selling like at scale, it is easier. Obviously, you're not going to do one-off roadmap items and bend your roadmap when it's not going to, benefit tens of thousands of customers. For enterprise, which is our big focus right now, we have this process, which, I think the question behind your question is like, what does the customer need versus what do they want?
Yeah.
And so with every customer we're serving and through our pipeline, we have this process. We're meeting regularly with myself. I'm deeply involved, our chief product officer, and our product and go-to-market teams. And for every customer, we're listing what are the deal blockers, or what are the things where we need to build this, and then what are the nice to haves that are not necessarily blocking this customer.
Mm.
That nuance is really hard to get right, and it requires the product and engineering folks to be on the calls with the customer as well themselves to understand and get really into the details. And it requires very strong sales discernment to push back on the customer and understand the why behind the request. Is this like what you don't want is people are like, customer says this, I'm going to go build it. You want to understand what is the need the customer is trying to solve, because maybe it could be solved with something else. Maybe it's a want and not a need, and it's an art, not a science, to figure out that distinction. But
Totally.
generally, we're not trying to bend our roadmap for one customer, but we are innovating and solving things that work across, and doing it not just in like a fit this feature, but let's innovate and build beyond what even they think they might need today.
Now, I know that you're pushing into the enterprise space now from the SMB space. What's that been like, and what learnings have you had in kind of, moving into that space a little bit more?
Well, Checkr has tried to do this before and failed. And so there's been a lot of learnings over the years. This was, before my time at Checkr, Checkr's first customer was DoorDash. Checkr, is the 90+% of the gig economy. And that's where we had our start, just allowing this high volume hiring without compromising accuracy. And then from there, the signs were right? Like, so you don't want to move into the enterprise unless you have signals that it's time to do so. And the signals were there, meaning our early customers, often tech companies, our startups are now enterprises themselves. DoorDash was no longer a small startup at this point. DoorDash was large, or many of the other gig companies. So that was a key thing. Second is we were getting inbound demand from enterprises, closing those deals and seeing signs of light. So like it was not a strategy failure at this point, but in executing and moving into enterprise, there was closing deals, but as they were starting to solution them, they were realizing like we didn't have our product and engineering teams at the table and committed on their roadmap. So we weren't able to deliver, to your question earlier, the features and functionality that were true needs, and therefore not able to get the customers live in the right way.
Makes sense. Who do you sell to? Is it the head of HR that you're typically working with in the organizations, or?
At a traditional enterprise, yes, it's the CHRO or someone in their team. In a gig company, it's a different team often, but yeah, CHRO.
I guess the whole SHRM group. Do you know the HR?
Yeah.
I spoke at I keynoted their conference, gosh, about 10 years ago in the middle of February in Detroit. A great event, but horrible time of year to go to Detroit.
Being from Michigan, I'm sure it was a horrible time.
Yeah, I'm from Ontario, just north of there.
Okay. Oh, there we go. We're neighbors.
Yeah, we're very close. Okay, so DoorDash is a first customer. That's got to be was that a coincidence, or how did you get them as a first customer? Did they come out of some, incubator, or were they just, people in the tech scene that knew each other?
Our founders used their network, worked and they discovered a really huge need from DoorDash and then from all the other gig companies at the time that they were not able to hire people quickly enough. And Daniel, our founder, Tony, the founder of DoorDash, both lived in the Bay Area, met in person. Kind of Daniel shared the vision of what they were working on, and there was a lot of excitement and commitment to partnering together to make it a reality.
I love that. All right, so you mentioned that you're a Series Z company right now. Did you do any funding or any raises during your time there?
We have not since I've been here, and we are cash flow positive, and we're right now operating with a lot of rigor in terms of expenditure, and because gone are the days of growth at all costs, and there's a relentless focus for myself, our CFO, our CEO on this.
What is that like culturally inside of an organization in tech to have to go to profitability and to focus on profitability? I mean, it's great you already are, and there definitely has been a shift to that in the last 3 years. You can certainly hear that. I was just at the All In Summit event I guess 2 weeks ago now in LA, and there was certainly a lot of discussion around tech companies needing to be cash flow positive. What happens at the leadership team level when that's more the case now, and it's not about going out for the next round and constantly chasing to the next round?
I mean, I think the first thing is thinking about if like we want to get to the beyond the rule of 40, right? Like what's that mix of growth and profitability? And I think there's a premium on growth versus profitability. You don't want to just jack up your EBITDA margins and stagnate, right? So I think that the first thing is making sure that you're not leaning too heavily in one direction or another. I think the second is we've had to create very real constraints in the business because you know this, like for a while sales and marketing expense as a percentage of revenue was like over 50%. It's down to like 30. There was not a lot of focus on CAC payback or LTV CAC across tech, just because it's free money. And so the constraints, whether those are hiring constraints, budgetary constraints, we've basically challenge the team now to start planning from zero. So like, don't assume that what you got last year is what you're getting this year. If you need to fund something growth focused, think about, can you fund that yourself? And obviously we're funding growth, we're funding things, but that mentality was a real shift that we had to bring the organization through. And it was really important to show the why, like how companies are valued, profitable versus unprofitable, like how this is, acting like owners in the company's financial outcomes. So we've done a lot of education such that our leaders are now thinking this way themselves. We're like, hey, Lindsay, I need to do this. I'm going to fund it through these 3 ways. And they're coming up with the ideas and the creativity themselves.
I'm curious what it's like, operationally and doing sales in kind of a period of maybe almost stagflation, right? Where we have a period of inflation with some kind of a recession, even if it hasn't been turned yet. You definitely see so many companies over the last 3 years, 2 years doing lots of layoffs. Did that impact sales and marketing? And how do you focus on still growing when, all of the news says everybody's laying off, but you guys still have to continue to grow? So, and the addressable market is still massive. Is it just that? Is it just letting people remember that, hey, we've got a massive market to go after. Not everybody's laying off, or there's enough people still doing background checks. What's the mindset and focus around that?
Yeah, there are headwinds for all of tech. For us, there's less hiring happening than there was before, and the consumptive nature of our business is hiring related. But that being said, the focus is on gaining share, and we're gaining meaningful share in growth despite the overall headwinds in the market. So rallying the team around that, and then really getting them thinking about more creative ways to drive growth. Instead of just continuing to throw marketing dollars, can we think, or sales headcount, right? Can we think more through self-service? Can we think more programmatic, optimizations through our entire funnel? And can we think about using AI in creative ways to help drive efficiency? And it's really, I think it's like the constraint has forced us to do this, and people come up with ideas that I don't think they would have had it been this,
True.
growth at all costs mindset, or if we hadn't been as rigorous in some of the constraints. It's hard, and it's hard to grow
Yeah.
in a recessionary environment, but it's amazing what people can do with the right goals and the right support for them to think outside of the box.
Well, it's kind of grandma was right when she said necessity is the mother of invention, right? That
Exactly.
we have to figure it out, we
Exactly.
don't figure it out. You mentioned something that I don't know what it meant. I think you said the rule of 40. What
Okay,
what
yeah.
what is that?
Yeah, in terms of what you want to get to as a company, from if you want to think about, going public or being highly valued, it's the rule of 40 is that when you add together your EBITDA margin, so kind of your cash flow margin in terms of profitability, plus your growth rate in terms of revenue, those two numbers combined should equal 40 or higher. And so if your revenue growth is 30% year over year, and then your EBITDA margin is 10%, that gets you to rule of 40. In the past, a lot of companies had like a maybe 50+% revenue growth, but negative
Uh,
EBITDA. That is not okay anymore. I mean, for certain classes of startups, maybe still there's patience there, but now you have to be both growing and profitable at the same time.
and is one
Ideally,
side of that equation more important than the other? Is growth rate more important than EBITDA margin, or is EBITDA more important than growth, or is it balance? Like, is
yeah,
there an
yeah.
ideal mix to make up the 40?
I don't think there's an ideal like formulaic mix, but for sure in the past, the growth rate was the most important, and you could even have negative EBITDA margins. Now there's absolutely the need to be profitable, but growth still is more important.
Okay.
There's a lot of data that shows a percentage of growth rate is worth more than a percentage of EBITDA margin, and I think that is true because if you're like flatlining but incredibly profit, you're not really a high growth tech company at that point.
Yeah.
You're just a different type of asset.
So 1 plus 39 would be better than 39 plus 1.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
cool. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to wrap my head around something. And
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't even want to pretend I knew what it was. I'm more intrigued to know what it is.
Yeah. And
I'm
on that point, I think that's something that we as a company have been educating everyone on, such that people know where we are in this, like why what they're spending, how this impacts us directly. Or how, like, when the engineer is building that feature, maybe they don't want to build for that customer that wasn't planned on the roadmap. It helps understand like how that translates into our growth story.
Yeah, we learned that back when we were building 1-800 Got Junk. I'm going to date myself, but going back 22 years ago, it was my second year there in 2002. We had a daily huddle where all of our employees would come to a daily huddle, and part of that was sharing some of the key metrics for the day and the week. And one of our employees one day put their hand up and they said, "What does it all mean?" And we're like, "Oh, you're right. Like, most people have no idea how those three metrics, although even though they were fairly simple, what those kind
Exactly.
of equated to." So every day going forward, and now it's been 22 years after they introduce the metrics, then the whole group says, "What does it all mean?" And they explain
Yeah,
what it means. And it was something that we always took for granted, but it's interesting how they do want to know, and when they do know, they can make it more educated decisions.
absolutely.
I'm
That's
curious what it was like for you. You came into Checkr a little over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. When you come into an organ, and how many employees are there now?
around 800
Yeah.
or
So
so.
when you came in, 800 people in the organization, I'm sure there must have been a couple people that were disappointed they didn't get the role, or maybe they had somebody else that was a favorite, or they weren't sure who you were. How did
Hmm.
you come in that first 90-day period and really build the trust, get collaborative, get to know the lay of the land? Like, what was your first 90 days like coming in?
I was prior to Checkr, I was at Google Cloud for 10 years. And when I joined, it was a few hundred people, like millions in revenue, this tiny department, kind of selling or giving away Gmail to businesses. And then when I left, we were, now we're at a $40 billion run rate and massive part of Google with GCP and Google Cloud Platform, G Suite. But the reason I say that is we grew exponentially for 10 years. And what I saw was, you have to keep bringing in leaders
Mhm.
and who have seen that chapter before. And some of them survived, some didn't. But what I saw work really well was an appreciation and a respect for the team and what got them the team, why we were in this kind of current state we were in. And on the flip side, it was incredibly demotivating for a leader to come and kind of condemn everything and not have a deep respect. So that was really important for me when I came to Checkr, to have an appreciation and a respect for why things were the way they were, what had been like the growth story and the challenges, and then also acknowledge, hey, we have to change some things, we have to move forward, but show that respect and appreciation for everything that had been built and how hard it was and not obvious to do all of that when a lot of these people joined from the beginning. So I think that built trust with the team and then like in a respect together. I think then spend time with every team and going in and understanding, what is going well here, what are the challenges, what do I need to know to be able to do my job effectively. And my leadership team was incredibly helpful as well at calling out where there were big fires that I needed to draw attention to. And then also where I had my own discernment there. And then from there, I think made some changes and moves. There was some spend I thought that was not necessary. We had some events planned that did not seem like a good ROI, and made some quick actions, but explained the why behind it and brought people along. All of those things I think together, just building trust, spending time, and then showing that even though there is respect for why things are the way they are, we're going to have to also make changes. And are you in or are you out and moving forward from here?
How do you not get dragged into the day-to-day or into the details with all of the potential areas that you could get dragged into, with all the different, which business areas, by the way, report to you, and approximately how many would be in all your downline?
So I started with a CRO. So I was brought in as CRO and was managing sales, marketing, customer success, partnerships, solutions, rep ops. So all of our go-to-market customer facing functions. And then my role expanded to COO. I also took on all of our customer support, candidate support, operations, frontline phone-based, ticket-based teams. So I run half the company and directly. It is hard. It is hard. And I think that it's, first of all, making sure that you have very strong leaders in place who you trust. And there's been up-leveling we've had to do across the team, but getting very confident in the leaders who are in place. Then there's also like have you heard about founder mode?
Yes. Uh, and the corresponding meme that goes along with it. I think, by the way, Brian is correct on founder mode in many ways. I'm curious what you think about it. I think it was misunderstood by a lot of people what he was talking about. This is Brian Chesky from
Yeah,
Airbnb
yeah.
talking, and Paul Graham writing the post about it. But I think a lot of people misunderstood what some of the intent was with founder mode. My belief is it is really about caring about everything, inspecting what you expect. It's still about delegating and empowering, but it's not abdicating and just kind of walking away and, well, let's see what happens. What are you
Exactly.
thinking about founder mode, though?
Yeah, and our CEO founder was at the talk. Brian Chesky talked through this, and he made a post about it as well. I think that the spirit of it, I agree with. I think it was kind of painted very black and white in the article, to draw, drew a lot of interest and debate. But I think the spirit of it to me is like this concept of owner mode or ownership, ruthless ownership of making sure that you are not kind of delegating away everything. It's good to delegate, no human can be across every single detail. but not benign or sorry, neglectful delegation. And I think that that's kind of a piece, when I mentioned this kind of founder mode is at Checkr, and my belief has been get amazing people, give them, align on goals, let them run. But the things that are most important, whether it's a big deal, whether it's a strategic initiative, whether it's a problem, I am very comfortable going very, very deep into the details and getting my hands dirty with the team. And any executive that I hire, I would recommend anyone when you're hiring someone, you should be very comfortable that they're able to do that and still like want to do that and want to get deeply involved. And I think that the trick is figuring out which things to go deep on and which not. And I think that that comes to the situation. How important is this to from a company overall strategy and goals perspective? And how is that aspect of the business performing right now?
Okay, I'm going to look up Daniel's article. Daniel, is it Ines, who's the
And
CEO?
yeah,
I
he
want to
posted
read
on
his.
LinkedIn about it.
Okay,
Kind
I'll
of in
check it out. Yeah.
response.
And I agree that it is about kind of looking into those details and caring about those details, but also, so I like the way that you addressed it. Sadly, the meme that's gone on is founders mode is just do piles of cocaine because I guess Brian was like massively kind of manic when he was doing the talk, I guess, and it came off
Mm,
in a terrible way. So I think they're making too
mm.
many jokes about something I think was great. Um,
Yeah, the spirit of it was really great and very useful and valuable to any company.
I agree. Yeah, it was great. What do you focus on as the COO? When you kind of mentioned you could get dragged into it all, what do you tend to focus on?
Yeah, so my role, as I mentioned, all the functions I run, and I think that the expansion kind of formally into COO title for me has been not only running, half the business, but helping run the company on behalf of our CEO. And so he and I spent a lot of time working together to figure out what are the things that are on his plate or that he was doing previously that I should take over and he can let go because he knows that I've got the same tenacity that I will go deep that he can trust that there will be inspection and where are the things that he needs to still be involved in directly. And so what we've tried to do is have me run in addition to all of the go-to-market and operations, but the goal setting processes of the company, the cadences, the business reviews, all of the leadership connection points. So
Mhm.
our extended leadership team, the team beyond that, the alignment with them, bringing them together, communications, all of that. So that I'm helping, take that off his plate. And so that he can spend as much of his time as possible on innovating for the future in terms of our product roadmap, additional product areas we're going into and expanding into, and then being external with investors and customers as needed. As a COO, I'm a commercial CEO, so spending
Yep.
as much time as possible with our customers, translating our customer needs into our product roadmap and making sure we're delivering for our customers and then innovating for them into the future.
I'm curious around the people side. If I think, a couple of layers below you to the mid-level, early stage emerging leaders. I launched a course a few years ago, an online course called Invest in Your Leaders, and it's got what I believe are 12 of the core skills that everybody needs to be good to lead and manage people. I'm curious what you think the core skills are. Where do you try to, with a broad brush, grow people on the skill set side, on the manager side?
First of all, I really believe in like, intellectual curiosity. And I think one way maybe to frame that at Checkr, one of our leadership principles is being able to fly high and fly low. And so just having that spirit of constant learning and connecting the dots between what's the strategy and what's the bigger picture, but then being able to zoom in and understand, if there's a customer, there's a bug, an engineering bug, not just figuring out like how to solve that, but like what was the broader issue that created that, or kind of like we were talking about earlier on the customer
Yep.
feature requests, like thinking about, what's the bigger need there. So that's a big one. The other is true ownership and thinking about things end to end and outside of your own swim lane. And it's hard to teach. I think that the way you can kind of explicitly state that and ask for that, I think one of the things that I try to do to foster that with teams is to give as much context as possible. Because when people don't have the context out of their own swim lane, it's very, very hard to think
Totally.
across, and often they're sub-optimizing. So that's obviously like explicitly passing down information, bringing people into the room where the discussion is happening, sharing out like that's stuff that's like very basic, but people underestimate how important it is and they don't invest in it.
Well,
So
completely. And I think at the senior leadership team level, we assume that everybody understands because we told them, 3 months ago in some meeting, but they forgot. And we've been mentioning it 15 times. They heard it once. Um,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I want to ask something that I know is really important to Checkr, and it's around the whole fair chance hiring. And the reason I want to ask about it is I did some work inside of a level 4 state penitentiary with a group called Defy Ventures and Hustle 2.0 with Cat
No
Hawk.
to five ventures. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious what the tie-in there is for Checkr with the whole fair chance hiring. And can you explain for people that don't know what it is, what
Mhm.
you're doing to give these people that fair chance?
Yeah, well, so 1 in 3 adult Americans, the stat shocked me when I first heard it. 1 in 3 adult Americans has an arrest or conviction record. So that's a third of the adult workforce has somehow been impacted by our criminal justice system in the United States. And when Daniel, our founder CEO, is kind of was starting Checkr, taking calls from people, right, who were calling in to ask about the status of their background check, hearing firsthand from people who was like, if I don't get this job, I will be homeless. I will be sent back because I'm in violation of my parole. All of these things. And then kind of was eyes were open to the day to day. He's from France. He didn't grow up in this country or have like, a much really acute awareness to the societal impact of this. He started going on prison visits, probably, Defy Ventures is a great partner in helping lead those and went into, prison and heard firsthand from people about their experience, the plans, like once they got released and realized that, people are often in prison for a reason. There's a sentence to be served, but that once you get out of prison, you're kind of continuing to serve that sentence because of how hard it can be to find a living wage. And background checks are important because they're needed across many different roles and industries and hiring. But they're very much in the past used as like a blunt force instrument.
Right.
For employers, many of them, if you had a marijuana conviction years ago, or if you had a DUI a very, very long time ago, that might not be relevant for this job. Maybe it would
Right.
be if you were driving people around and you had that last week.
Right.
And the three strikes law in California also has put a lot of people with felony convictions to life in prison, who then come out and have trouble finding work. So he's built into the product. We've built into the product ways for companies to think about in advance what things do they want to surface and adjudicate and make decisions based on and which do not. Checkr has taken the 1% pledge to pledge 1% of our profits, our equity, and our product to social impact. And we are investing tremendously in fair chance advocacy and awareness and hiring ourselves. 5% of our own hires at Checkr are fair chance hires, meaning were incarcerated, spent time for a felony or misdemeanor conviction. And we've invested in apprenticeship programs to bring people in. And it is, I can't tell you how life-changing it is for people. And also businesses win, our like society wins when people are earning a living wage. They're not going back into the system, and we're kind of helping end the cycle for many.
Yeah, I think it's a huge cause. I think it's an important cause. I think it's one that we need to get the media to talk about a lot more than they talk about currently.
Mhm.
I have a couple of close friends who spent time in prison. One was in for 14 years, one was in for 19 years. The one that was in
Mhm.
for 14, Andre Norman, has been out of prison for at least 15 now. And
Mhm.
he's been hired by the government to go inside of prisons to help turn the systems around. He graduated Harvard Law. He still
Mhm.
can't lease an apartment in the state of Arizona without someone co-signing. It's
Mhm.
ridiculous because
Exactly.
because of something that just is so far in the past, right? There's a friend of mine who runs a company in California called John Shigarian, runs a group called Electronic Recyclers of America. And he's hired about 1,000 people. And the only people he's ever hired are kids off the street from single moms or that have spent time in jail or prison. And he said the loyalty from just hiring those people is so high, they don't want to
Mm-hmm.
go back to prison. So I think this what you're doing is really strong.
It's good for the people, it's good for the company, and their retention rates are strong, commitment and loyalty as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So I want to speak a little bit about, before we wrap, just around AI and the changes it's making to your business and to the industry. What's the mindset that you have related to AI, and how do you get your team and your downlines to kind of focus around, I guess, leveraging AI in the business and in
Mhm.
particular, not just Chat GPT, right? When we think that
Mhm.
if you look at there's a dashboard called There's an AI for that. I think there's something like 15,000 AI tools to do 20,000 AI tasks. It's amazing. What
Yeah.
are you guys doing with AI?
Yeah, and I mean everyone is scrambling to try to figure out, how and if to incorporate this where. Yeah, I see three general areas for AI, at least for Checkr, how we're thinking about it. One is AI within the product itself. And so using AI, for example, I mentioned like every county in the US has different ways to categorize, let's say, like a shoplifting. That might be called a
Mm,
thousand different things in a thousand different counties and ways to just automate and make sure it's more accurate, bringing the classifiers together, employment history lookups, making sure the product is better for our customers. That's kind of like use case one. Not making decisions using AI, that's dangerous territory, but making the product better. The second is digital agents is kind of how I would frame it. And a lot of companies are experimenting with this, and this could be many different aspects. But one we've seen be incredibly successful is in our customer chat support. Like
yeah,
customers want to be able to chat, like be able to get quicker responses in a generative AI way versus a kind of a canned question and response, but being able to get quick information for customers quickly. Also, experimenting with customer, like more acquisition touch points as well. I think this is the next frontier. It's not as built out as the customer support use case, but trying to acquire new customers using an AI supplemental agents. Not You're never going to replace humans on that, but
yeah.
that's the next frontier. And then the third is automating workflows internally. If you're doing a process where you're getting a quote, combining it with this piece of information and that, building AI to help on that and just save time
No
is
brainer.
incredibly useful. There's so much innovation happening in our team. What I've told my leadership team is if you're not already thinking about how to use this in your team, like don't wait for me. If you're not thinking about it, you are behind. And there was we have a team in marketing, an individual who created this chatbot for internal use so that you can ask it any question and it will tell you the answer to give to a customer based on all of the information that we know is externally facing. So it won't tell you anything internally facing. And you still might go to a human to validate something really complex, but that kind of stuff is really hard to like knowledge management is really hard to do with any
Yeah.
tool you have. Someone built that in a week.
I saw one of our COO Alliance members demoed an AI tool use case the other day, and it's a role play or role practicing tough conversations that a leader sometimes needs to have with one of their team. Like maybe it's
Interesting.
addressing some conflict issue, and you can actually practice with the AI tool 3 or 4 times, pretending the AI tool is the actual customer, and it will train you how to handle it better. And then so you can go into the actual, it's crazy. I watched the demo. I'm
That's
like, this
great.
is amazing.
That's great.
So I
Yeah.
think there's a bit of a mindset shift around, that AI is not necessarily going to replace people unless those people are not willing to leverage AI. Do you have
That's a
kind of
good way of
this,
framing it.
yeah, do you have a
Yeah.
similar frame that you use, or is it just
I
trying to
think
get people
it's
excited about it?
trying to get people excited about it and like if it's a way to innovate and make your job more interesting. So everyone wants to work on things that are growing their career and growing their skills. And for certain areas where maybe AI can replace the work, it's not replacing the person. It's replacing that repetitive part of your job such
Mhm.
that you can focus on higher value work for yourself and for our customers and learning and development. So like we had this interesting last week we have a document culture at Checkr, like the Amazon style, like write documents, read
Yeah.
them. There was something my team and I worked on one, and it just wasn't up to par. So I spent a lot of time myself improving it. And it was like, and I told them after, like, this wasn't a good use of my time. I'm gonna schedule time to like walk you through how to learn to do this better next time. And one of them, she put it into like an AI co-pilot and asked to compare the two versions, and it spit out a document. It's called Lindsay's Brain. Here's like some things that you think about and to make your documents better. But stuff like that would have taken a lot of time, that would have taken my time,
Yeah.
just helping people learn and develop.
And I mean, AI still hallucinates a little bit with some of its answers, but it's
Yes,
certainly a
for
whole lot
sure.
better than most of our employees who sometimes hallucinate as well. So kind of even. I want you to go
Exactly.
back to the 21 or 22-year-old Lindsay Scrase and give her some advice. What advice would you give the younger you that you know to be true today?
Wow. I would say continue to trust your guts and follow your own compass. I think that's served me incredibly well in making every career decision I've made. And then on the flip side, like trusting my instincts quicker on decisions. Don't go for the perfect decision, but trust myself.
I love it. Well, yes, it's definitely paid off for you. Lindsay Grace, the COO for Checker. Thanks so much for sharing with us on the Second in Command podcast. Really appreciate the time
Thanks.
today.
Thank you, Cameron.
But we hire for the roles based on the needs of the role and the personality fit for the party coming in to make sure that they're set up to win, right? And then it's like, how do we develop them? So if they're in the giftologist role, we set them up with sales-oriented training. How do you work with other people?